Members of the House Oversight Committee are now threatening contempt of Congress charges against recently dismissed Attorney General Pam Bondi should she refuse to testify regarding her management of the Epstein files. The Justice Department moved to shield her today, stating that since Bondi can no longer appear in her official capacity as Attorney General, the subpoena does not compel her to show up. The committee's top Democrat is now pushing to hold her in contempt, and he may find allies across the aisle, most notably Representative Nancy Mace, who was the driving force behind the subpoena in the first place. Congresswoman Mace made her position clear today. Pam Bondi cannot escape accountability. The American people are owed answers, and we fully expect her to appear once a new date is established. My political guests are back, and they're joined by former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. So the DOJ's position is that she's no longer Attorney General. Therefore, the subpoena carries no weight. No, that's a hollow argument, John. Here's the reasoning. A subpoena is nothing more than a legal directive for a witness to provide relevant information they possess. As of right now, former Attorney General Pam Bondi holds the exact same knowledge she had last week when she was still serving in that role. The DOJ has invented this distinction that since she's no longer the AG, the subpoena is void. But first, the subpoena names Pam Bondi specifically, not whoever currently holds the office. Second, if it were meant for the current AG, the DOJ would be putting forward Todd Blanche as a substitute, which they are not. And third, this committee has previously subpoenaed multiple former attorneys general, including Eric Holder, Bill Barr, and Merrick Garland. This subpoena stands. Democratic Congressman Garcia, the ranking member, says he intends to pursue contempt if she fails to appear. Would they actually have the votes? On the Oversight Committee, every Democrat would need to be joined by at least 3 Republicans to secure a majority. We know Nancy Mace is on board. Whether 2 more Republicans follow remains to be seen. If it clears the committee, it heads to the full House. And here's the key point. John, if the full House votes for contempt, it moves to the DOJ for potential prosecution. I'm quite confident Todd Blanche will not greenlight a prosecution of Pam Bondi. But consider this. For an administration, and for Bondi and Blanche specifically, who have repeatedly praised themselves as the most transparent in history, a contempt charge from the Oversight Committee or the full House would be a serious embarrassment. One more quick question. Could they simply reissue the subpoena to Pam Bondi as a private citizen rather than as Attorney General? Absolutely. If the DOJ is going to hide behind a technicality, it would take all of 10 minutes to rewrite the subpoena and put that argument to rest. Now, Scott Pam Bondi repeatedly claimed hers was the most transparent administration in history. Many Republicans have questioned that claim, while Democrats have leaned into it. Do you think she should simply go ahead and testify? Look, the White House wants this buried. Bondi wants this buried. But there are enough Republicans who aren't going to let that happen, especially with an election coming in November. Personally, I have no issue with her testifying. I also have no issue with the White House invoking whatever privileges it believes it has, and no issue with the committee asserting its authority. At the end of the day, if she shows up, answers questions honestly and openly, I think that's a reasonable outcome. Commerce Secretary Rudnick is also scheduled to appear before the Oversight Committee in the coming weeks, so one way or another, there will be another chapter to this story. The questions aren't going away. She was at the helm of the DOJ when the relevant legislation was passed and when these files were being disclosed. The public has a right to expect her to come forward and account for what happened. That said, the administration may have legitimate grounds to assert privilege over certain information, and there are legal avenues to work through that. Congressman Garcia will push for contempt, and he may get it through the committee with the help of Congresswoman Mace and a couple of others. Getting it through the full floor is a different matter. But here's the political reality. 7 months is a long time, and the odds today suggest there could be a Democratic majority on that committee come next year. So the question becomes, do you cooperate now or face a harder reckoning later? The central argument remains the same: the victims deserve answers. I have personally worked with survivors of sexual assault and rape. If you are genuinely committed to transparency, you show up and you answer the questions. Refusing to do so only confirms you are not serious. And in the middle of a midterm election, it sends a clear message to voters that this DOJ is running cover for Donald Trump. What exactly are they hiding? These survivors are not going away. It doesn't matter who controls Congress. They will continue to fight, and this conversation will not disappear. Either you believe these women deserve justice, or you don't, and your actions will reveal which side you are on. Protecting Donald Trump from what, exactly? From whatever the files actually contain. Whether or not there is truly something damaging in them, refusing to release everything creates the unmistakable appearance of a cover-up. Now, you signed the law. You committed to releasing those files. That has not happened. I'm now joined by Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia, a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, why do you believe the DOJ is working to prevent her from testifying? The answer is straightforward. The DOJ failed to meet its legal obligations. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was unambiguous. All files were required to be released with only a narrow set of permitted redactions. They missed the statutory deadline. Between 2.5 and 3 million files remain unreleased, and thousands were illegally redacted. They don't want her in that chair because we would demand answers. Who authorized the illegal redactions? Who decided to halt the release before the law was fully satisfied? What communications, if any, occurred between DOJ leadership and President Trump regarding those choices? Those are exactly the questions they don't want on the record. It's not difficult to understand why. What makes this particularly striking is that numerous high-profile individuals, including a former president, have already been compelled to answer questions before this committee. We're talking about figures like Attorney General Bill Barr, Alex Acosta, the architect of the original sweetheart deal in Florida, and even Hillary Clinton, who sat for her deposition. How are the survivors reacting to the DOJ's attempt to invalidate the subpoena on the grounds that it was issued to her in her official capacity? It is yet another betrayal of survivors who have shown extraordinary courage in demanding transparency and accountability. That is what we are fighting for. The legal argument that the subpoena expires with her title is simply absurd. The purpose of the subpoena is to obtain information relevant to our investigation. That information lives in Pam Bondi's memory. It was there before she was fired, and it remains there now. She is legally obligated to appear on April 14th and testify under oath. Contempt is one path forward. There are others, civil contempt, which involves a lengthier judicial process and potential daily fines, or criminal contempt, which would be referred back to her own former department, or enforcement by the sergeant-at-arms. What are the realistic odds any of these mechanisms succeed, given that DOJ is unlikely to prosecute her? With this particular DOJ, the civil contempt route is the most viable. It routes through the courts and could result in financial penalties that accumulate for every day she defies the subpoena. That's a real and meaningful option. We could also pursue criminal contempt and force the DOJ into the uncomfortable position of publicly refusing to prosecute, which would itself be a powerful illustration of how far this administration has gone to suppress the Epstein files. Some have raised the issue of your stance on the Clintons' compliance with their subpoenas. The suggestion was that you were comfortable with obstruction then and voted against holding them in contempt. Help me understand how this situation is different. To be precise, I voted in favor of civil contempt for the Clintons. I did not support criminal contempt because I believed it would have undermined the actual goal-getting testimony. I also want to be clear about the distinction between Bill and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had absolutely no relevant information about Epstein, no connection, no relationship whatsoever. Her inclusion in this process was purely political. Chairman Comer wanted a headline, and I don't believe he got one. Republicans came across as overreaching. Bill Clinton, on the other hand, did have a documented relationship with Epstein. The questions asked in his deposition were legitimate. The process was worthwhile, and I supported civil contempt specifically to make sure it happened. Chairman Comer established the standard here. If you don't show up when called, criminal contempt follows. I fully expect he will apply that same standard to Pam Bondi if she fails to appear by April 14th. And if Bondi remains out of reach, will you pursue Todd Blanche, who is now the acting Attorney General? We intend to get Bondi's testimony, whether it happens this year or next. But Todd Blanche will also need to answer questions at some point. Bondi delegated significant day-to-day authority over the Epstein files to Blanche, including potentially some of the decisions around those redactions. Depending on what Bondi tells us, we may have substantial questions for him as well, including, I would expect, questions about his visit with Ghislaine Maxwell. That's Congressman James Walkinshaw. Thank you.